The final confrontation came at the nexus point, where three massive fleets converged in the largest military gathering in galactic history. Over 10,000 ships from the Federation, Zephyrian Empire, and Vorthan Collective filled the space around. A dying star that had witnessed countless smaller battles over the past 3 centuries. Everyone expected this to be the decisive engagement that would finally determine the winner of the longest war the galaxy had ever known. Admiral Morrison commanded the Federation fleet from his flagship while maintaining constant communication with Captain Lisa aboard the USS Liberty. The human influence had spread throughout his forces until nearly every ship carried mixed crews who had learned to blend alien technology with human unpredictability. The transformation had been so complete that Morrison sometimes wondered if his fleet was still fighting the same war that had begun centuries before his birth. Dr. Alex Turner prepared for what he believed would be his most important mission as the 3 fleets maneuvered into battle positions around the nexus point. Instead of analyzing enemy psychology for tactical advantage, he was planning to address the fundamental assumptions that had kept this war burning for longer than most civilizations had existed. He carried a message that would either end the conflict or mark the beginning of its most destructive phase. Commander Ryan Clark coordinated with ship captains across the Federation fleet as they prepared for combat on a scale that dwarfed every previous engagement. The tactical displays showed formations so vast that individual ships appeared as tiny dots of light against the darkness of space. Each side possessed enough firepower to destroy entire star systems, and the coming battle would determine which civilizations survived to see another century. The Zephyrian fleet approached in perfect geometric formations that demonstrated the mathematical precision their species had perfected over thousands of years. Their crystalline ships moved like jewelry floating through space, while energy fields created defensive barriers that sparkled with deadly beauty. Every vessel held its assigned position with mechanical accuracy as the entire fleet advanced according to calculations that had been refined through countless previous battles. The Vorthan Collective deployed their biomechanical swarms in patterns that shifted and flowed like living organisms adapting to environmental changes. Individual ships pulsed with bioluminescent signals that coordinated their movements through the shared consciousness that connected every pilot and every weapon system. The collective mind directed 10,000 individual units as if they were cells in a single massive organism preparing to defend itself against external threats. As the 3 fleets moved closer to engagement range, Alex activated the most powerful communication array in the Federation fleet and began broadcasting on all frequencies simultaneously. His message reached every ship in all 3 fleets, including vessels whose crews had been trying to kill each other just hours before. The words he spoke were simple, but they carried implications that would transform the understanding of every being who heard them. Alex explained that he had spent months studying the war and interviewing prisoners from both enemy species. He had learned that the conflict continued not because any side was inherently evil or because the issues that started the fighting were impossible to resolve. The war persisted because each civilization had become trapped by its own way of thinking and could not imagine alternatives to the approaches that had failed for 3 centuries. The Crystalline Council believed that logical analysis could solve any problem and that perfect calculations would eventually lead to perfect victories. They had spent generations refining their mathematical approaches to warfare until their strategies had become works of art that were beautiful to contemplate but ultimately ineffective against enemies who had learned to counter every logical move. The Vorthan Collective trusted in the wisdom of shared consciousness and believed that perfect coordination would overcome any individual opposition. They had developed their group mind until it could process vast amounts of information and coordinate complex operations, but they had lost the ability to adapt to situations that fell outside their collective understanding. The Federation had fallen into the same trap by believing that superior technology would eventually provide solutions to military problems that technology alone could not solve. They had built faster ships and more powerful weapons while following strategic doctrines that had become as rigid as those of their enemies. Alex continued his broadcast by describing how human crews had learned from their alien colleagues while teaching them the value of cognitive flexibility. Zephyrian officers had discovered creativity and found that illogical actions could sometimes achieve results that pure mathematics could not deliver. Vorthan individuals had experienced the freedom of independent thought and learned that breaking away from collective consciousness could lead to innovative solutions. Federation scientists had achieved breakthrough discoveries by combining logical analysis with intuitive leaps that produced insights no computer could calculate. The greatest advances had come not from choosing between different approaches, but from learning when to apply logic and when to embrace chaos, depending on what each situation required. The message spread through all three fleets as crew members began talking to each other across battle lines that had separated them for generations. Ships that had been preparing to fight began moving closer together, not to engage in combat but to facilitate communication between former enemies who were discovering they had more in common than anyone had realized. Captain Lisa watched her tactical displays as the massive formations dissolved into smaller groups where representatives from all three sides could meet and discuss the ideas that Alex had introduced. Weapons powered down and defensive shields dropped as the largest military force in galactic history transformed itself into the largest peace conference the universe had ever witnessed. Admiral Morrison received reports from across the fleet, indicating that individual commanders were making independent decisions to cease hostilities and open dialogue with their supposed enemies. The rigid command structures that had controlled military operations for centuries were giving way to spontaneous cooperation between beings who had been killing each other just moments before. The war ended not with the decisive battle that everyone had expected, but with a collective realization that the conflict had persisted only because each side had believed their way of thinking was the only correct approach. Once they understood that differences in cognitive style were strengths rather than weaknesses, the reasons for fighting simply disappeared like shadows when lights were turned on. Alex stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty watching as ships from all three fleets formed mixed groups where former enemies worked together to solve problems that had seemed impossible when approached from single perspectives. The galaxy was learning that diversity of thought was not a threat to be eliminated, but a resource to be valued and protected. The peace treaty was signed aboard the USS Horizon with representatives from every species working together to create agreements that no single civilization could have conceived alone. The document bore the signatures of beings who had spent their entire lives preparing for war, but who had discovered that the greatest victories came not from defeating enemies, but from transforming them into allies who brought new ideas and fresh perspectives to ancient challenges. Admiral Morrison watched the tactical displays in his command center with growing amazement as human tactics spread throughout the Federation fleet like a beneficial infection. Ships that had fought according to rigid protocols for centuries were suddenly experimenting with chaotic maneuvers that confused enemy targeting systems and disrupted carefully planned defensive formations. The war that had remained static for so long was finally moving, and the movement favored the Federation. Captain Lisa flew her expanded squadron of 12 ships toward the contested Rigel system where Zephyrian forces had maintained control for 15 years. Her original 3 vessels had been joined by 9 more ships with mixed human and alien crews, who had volunteered to learn the strange new way of fighting that seemed to defy every principle of advanced military science. The alien crew members still looked uncomfortable when human officers gave orders that violated their training, but they had learned to trust results that spoke louder than doctrine. Commander Ryan coordinated the attack on Rigel Prime using a battle plan that existed only in outline form, with most details left to be improvised during combat. Traditional Federation strategies required detailed coordination between hundreds of ships moving in precise formations, but human tactics emphasized individual initiative and adaptability over centralized control. Each ship captain was given broad objectives and told to achieve them using whatever method seemed appropriate. Dr. Alex Turner monitored enemy communications from his position aboard the USS Liberty and reported that Zephyrian commanders were struggling to respond to Federation attacks that changed tactics mid-battle without any apparent coordination. The crystalline aliens had developed sophisticated counter-strategies for every known Federation approach, but they could not adapt quickly enough to address threats that transformed themselves while combat was in progress. The battle for Rigel began when Federation ships approached the system using 7 different attack vectors simultaneously. Zephyrian defenders allocated their forces to counter each threat according to calculations based on previous Federation behavior, but they soon discovered that the attacking ships were not following any predictable pattern. Some groups executed textbook assault maneuvers while others performed actions that seemed to serve no tactical purpose except to confuse enemy response systems. Lisa led her squadron through the outer defensive perimeter using a technique that Alex had developed called controlled chaos. Her ships moved in formations that appeared random but were actually designed to trigger specific psychological responses from enemy commanders. The Zephyrians tried to identify the human strategy by analyzing ship movements and communication patterns, but they found only confusion where logical order should have existed. Meanwhile, other Federation units were discovering that alien crews could learn to embrace unpredictability when they understood its effectiveness. A squadron of Altarian bird-like beings began performing aerial maneuvers that had never been used in space combat, while a group of Centaurian aquatic creatures coordinated attacks using sound patterns that resembled whale songs rather than military communications. The Vorthan response to the Federation assault revealed the deep impact that human tactics were having on enemy forces. Instead of operating as a unified collective, the biomechanical beings began splitting into smaller groups that acted independently of their central consciousness. Some units continued to follow traditional Vorthan doctrine while others experimented with chaotic approaches that would have been impossible under normal collective control. Ryan observed that the enemy fleet was essentially fighting itself as different groups pursued contradictory strategies without proper coordination. The collective consciousness that had been the Vorthan's greatest strength was becoming a weakness as individual units learned to question the wisdom of shared decision-making. The psychological virus that human tactics had introduced was spreading through enemy ranks faster than any physical weapon could have achieved. Alex received reports from across the battle zone indicating that both enemy species were experiencing unprecedented levels of internal conflict. Zephyrian ship captains were ignoring orders from their superiors and making tactical decisions based on immediate circumstances rather than ancient protocols. Vorthan subgroups were breaking away from the collective mind and forming independent alliances with other rebel units. The Battle of Rigel ended with the first complete Federation victory in over a century. Zephyrian forces retreated in disorder while Vorthan units scattered in dozens of different directions as their command structure collapsed under the weight of internal contradictions. Federation casualties were the lowest recorded in any major engagement, and several enemy ships actually surrendered rather than continue fighting a war they no longer understood. Lisa brought her squadron home to find Admiral Morrison waiting with orders that would expand human involvement throughout the Federation fleet. Command headquarters had authorized the formation of mixed tactical units that would spread human methods to every ship in the Alliance. The experiment that had begun with 3 primitive vessels was becoming a transformation that would remake galactic warfare. The success at Rigel was followed by victories at a dozen other contested systems as Federation forces learned to combine alien technology with human unpredictability. Enemy strongholds that had resisted conventional attacks for decades fell to assaults that seemed to make no sense until they succeeded. The mathematical precision that had once defined galactic warfare was giving way to a new approach that valued creativity over calculation. Alex continued his work with captured enemy personnel, but now his role was changing from interrogator to teacher. He helped Zephyrian prisoners understand that rigid thinking could be a fatal limitation while showing Vorthan individuals how to operate effectively without constant guidance from their collective consciousness. Some of the former enemies became willing students who carried new ideas back to their own forces when prisoner exchanges were arranged, Morrison reviewed. Intelligence reports that showed growing dissent within enemy ranks as traditional military doctrines came under question, from officers who had experienced defeats they could not explain. The war was becoming something that none of the participants had expected, and the changes were accelerating beyond anyone's ability to control them. Lisa realized that human tactics had unleashed forces that were transforming the conflict from a military struggle into something resembling a cultural revolution. The question was no longer whether the Federation could win the war, but whether the galaxy was ready for the kind of peace that might emerge from the chaos that human minds had introduced to an ancient conflict. News of the human victory at Sigma Draconis spread through both fleets faster than light communication could carry it, Dr. Alex Turner found himself studying captured enemy personnel who had been brought to Federation facilities for interrogation and medical treatment. What he discovered in those interviews would change his understanding of the war and provide the key to ending a conflict that had consumed the galaxy for 3 centuries. The first prisoner Alex interviewed was a Zephyrian ship captain named Kethvar, who had commanded one of the defensive positions at Sigma Draconis. The tall crystalline being sat motionless in the interview chamber, radiating confusion and distress through the colored lights that played across his transparent skin. When Alex asked about the battle, Kethvar responded with questions that revealed more than any direct answers could have provided. Kethvar wanted to know why the human ships had stopped in the middle of their attack run when continuing forward would have been more efficient. He could not understand why they had reversed course when their original vector would have brought them closer to their targets. Most puzzling of all, he demanded to know what strategic advantage the humans had gained by executing maneuvers that violated every principle of tactical efficiency that Zephyrian military doctrine considered sacred. Alex realized that the Zephyrian captain was not being difficult or evasive, but was genuinely unable to comprehend actions that fell outside his cultural understanding of proper warfare. The crystalline aliens had developed their military strategies over thousands of years, and those strategies had become as rigid as religious doctrine. They could not adapt to situations that their ancient teachings had never anticipated. The second group of prisoners came from the Vorthan Collective and presented an entirely different challenge. The biomechanical beings shared fragments of a vast group consciousness that normally allowed them to coordinate their actions with perfect precision. However, their capture had severed their connection to the collective mind, and they seemed lost without the constant flow of shared thoughts that had guided their entire lives. When Alex interviewed the Vorthans, they spoke in overlapping voices that finished each other's sentences and referenced memories that belonged to other individuals. They described the battle at Sigma Draconis as a painful experience where their shared awareness had been overwhelmed by contradictory sensory input. The chaotic actions of the human ships had created a cascade of confusion that rippled through their group consciousness like a virus spreading through a computer network. The Vorthan prisoners explained that their collective mind was designed to process large amounts of information efficiently, but it could not handle truly random events. When faced with actions that served no logical purpose, their shared consciousness had essentially crashed, leaving individual units unable to coordinate their responses. The human attack had not just defeated their ships, but had temporarily disabled their ability to think as a unified entity. Alex presented his findings to Captain Lisa and Commander Ryan during a strategy meeting aboard the USS Liberty. He explained that both enemy species possessed fatal weaknesses that human tactics could exploit, without requiring superior technology or firepower. The key was understanding that advanced civilizations had become trapped by their own sophistication and could not respond effectively to primitive approaches they considered beneath consideration. Lisa listened to Alex's analysis and began developing new tactics based on psychological warfare rather than conventional military strategy. She understood that humans could not match alien technology, but they could attack enemy assumptions and exploit cultural blind spots that had been created by thousands of years of predictable warfare, the first test of human psychological tactics. came during the defense of Volf 359, where a Zephyrian battle group attempted to capture a Federation supply depot. Lisa deployed her 3 ships in a formation that appeared random but was actually designed to trigger specific responses from the ritualistic alien commanders. She broadcast classical music from Earth during the battle, confusing Zephyrian communication. Systems that had never encountered organized sound patterns that served no tactical purpose. Ryan coordinated with other ship commanders to paint elaborate, nonsensical patterns on their hulls that disrupted Vorthan optical targeting systems. The biomechanical beings tried to analyze the colorful designs, looking for hidden tactical information that did not exist. Their collective consciousness became fixated on solving a puzzle that had no solution, while human ships attacked targets that had been left UNDEFENDD. The second test came during the siege of Proxima Centauri, where both sides had been locked in a stalemate for 8 months. Lisa convinced Federation commanders to allow her ships to attempt a breakthrough by flying through an asteroid field that everyone considered impassable. The Zephyrians had not bothered to defend the asteroid field because their computers calculated that any ships attempting to navigate the chaotic environment would be destroyed by collisions. Human pilots used their natural ability to adapt to changing conditions as they maneuvered between moving asteroids that shifted position unpredictably. Their ships suffered minor damage from small impacts, but they emerged on the far side of the field where no enemy forces waited to intercept them. The surprise attack succeeded because the Zephyrians could not imagine that anyone would deliberately choose an inefficient approach when safer alternatives were available. Alex continued his interviews with enemy prisoners and discovered that some of them were beginning to appreciate human methods, even though they could not fully understand the reasoning behind them. A few Zephyrian officers admitted that rigid adherence to tactical doctrine had become a limitation rather than a strength. Several Vorthan individuals spoke about the strange freedom they felt when operating independently without the constant guidance of the collective consciousness. The psychological impact of human tactics spread through enemy ranks as survivors shared their experiences with other units. Zephyrian commanders began second-guessing their traditional strategies, while Vorthan subgroups started experimenting with independent action. The seeds of doubt that humans had planted were growing into something that threatened the foundations of enemy military doctrine. Lisa realized that the war was becoming something entirely different from the technological conflict that had raged for 3 centuries. Human involvement had introduced an element of chaos that neither side had been prepared to handle. The question now was whether psychological warfare could achieve what superior technology had failed to accomplish, and bring the galactic conflict to an end before it consumed any more worlds. 3 months later, Lisa stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, watching her mixed crew of humans and aliens prepare for their first real battle. The Federation had given her 3 ships and the best technology they could provide, but she knew that advanced weapons would not be enough to break a stalemate that had lasted for centuries. She needed something that no computer could calculate and no strategy manual could teach. The USS Liberty flew alongside the USS Defiance and USS Ranger toward the Sigma Draconis system, where Zephyrian forces had maintained an impenetrable blockade for over 50 years. 17 previous Federation attempts to break through the defensive grid had failed, and Admiral Morrison expected the 18th attempt to end the same way. Lisa hoped to prove him wrong, but she understood why he remained skeptical about human tactics. Commander Ryan Clark studied the enemy formation on his tactical display and shook his head at what he saw. The Zephyrians had positioned their ships in a perfect geometric pattern that covered every possible approach to the system. Energy fields overlapped to create zones where no Federation vessel could survive, and weapon placements provided coverage for every blind spot. It was a masterpiece of defensive engineering that had turned back some of the most sophisticated attacks in galactic history. Dr. Alex Turner worked at his psychology station, analyzing Zephyrian behavior patterns and communication intercepts. He had identified the alien species as ritualistic beings who approached warfare like a sacred ceremony with prescribed responses to every situation. Their defensive formation was not just militarily sound but also culturally significant, representing their belief that order and precision could overcome any chaos that enemies might bring against them. The alien crew members watched their human officers with barely concealed concern as Lisa announced her battle plan. Instead of attacking the weakest points in the Zephyrian formation, she intended to charge directly at the strongest position where three massive dreadnoughts maintained overlapping energy shields. The alien tactical officer respectfully suggested that such an approach would result in the immediate destruction of all three human ships. Lisa acknowledged the risk but explained that predictable tactics had failed for 17 consecutive attempts, and it was time to try something that no enemy commander would expect. She ordered her ships to accelerate toward the Zephyrian strongpoint while broadcasting their approach on all communication frequencies. The enemy would see them coming and have plenty of time to prepare their defenses, which was exactly what Lisa wanted. The Zephyrian commander received reports of the approaching Federation ships with satisfaction that bordered on contempt. The humans were clearly inexperienced in galactic warfare and had chosen the most heavily defended approach vector in the entire formation. He allocated sufficient firepower to destroy the three ships and settled back to watch another Federation defeat. Ryan coordinated with the other two ship commanders as they closed the distance to the enemy formation. Their alien crew members performed their duties with professional competence, but he could see the doubt in their expressions as they prepared to execute what appeared to be an elaborate suicide mission. Human crew members seemed more relaxed as they checked their equipment and waited for Lisa's signal. Alex monitored Zephyrian communications and confirmed that the enemy was reacting exactly as predicted. Their defensive systems were powering up and their gunners were calculating firing solutions for targets that continued to approach on the most direct possible course. The aliens were preparing to deliver maximum firepower against ships that seemed determined to make themselves easy targets. Lisa watched the range counter decrease as her small fleet moved deeper into the Zephyrian kill zone. Enemy weapons tracked their movement with mechanical precision, while targeting computers calculated the exact moment when the Federation ships would enter effective firing range. She could feel the tension on her bridge as crew members waited for the order that would either vindicate human tactics or destroy them all in the next few minutes. The moment came when Zephyrian weapons reached full power and began their firing sequence. Energy beams lanced out from the three dreadnoughts, targeting the approaching Federation ships with mathematical accuracy. Lisa issued her command, and all three human vessels executed a maneuver that no tactical computer would ever recommend. The ships stopped dead in space using emergency reverse thrusters at maximum power. The sudden deceleration stressed their engines beyond safe limits and threw every crew member against their restraints, but it also did something that caught the Zephyrian gunners completely by surprise. Their targeting solutions became instantly obsolete as the Federation ships changed from approaching targets to stationary ones in the span of seconds, before the enemy could recalculate their firing solutions. Lisa ordered her ships to reverse course and accelerate away from the formation at maximum speed. The Zephyrian weapons fired at empty space where their targets should have been, while the three Federation vessels slipped sideways through gaps in the defensive grid that had opened during the confusion. Ryan coordinated the attack run as all three ships targeted the command vessels positioned behind the main defensive line. The Zephyrians had placed their headquarters ships in the safest possible location, but they had never considered that attackers might approach from the direction of their own defensive weapons. The command vessels were caught completely unprepared. As human ships appeared where no enemy should have been able to reach, Daleks watched the enemy formation collapse as communication links failed and defensive positions lost coordination. The Zephyrian commander tried to reorganize his forces, but his carefully planned formation had been designed to repel attacks from outside the perimeter, not from ships that appeared inside their own defensive grid. Individual captains began making independent decisions as the unified command structure broke down. Lisa led her ships through the chaos of the collapsing formation, while enemy vessels fired at targets they could not properly identify. The perfect geometric pattern that had protected the system for 50 years became a liability as ships found themselves shooting at their own allies while the three Federation vessels escaped through openings that should not have existed. The Battle of Sigma Draconis ended with the first Federation victory in the system's recent history. Lisa brought her ships home with minimal damage while behind them the Zephyrian blockade scattered in confusion. Admiral Morrison reviewed the battle reports with amazement as he realized that 3 primitive human ships had accomplished what 17 previous Federation fleets had failed to achieve. The impossible had become possible, and the war would never be the same. Captain Lisa Hayes stepped off the transport shuttle and onto Kepler Station, feeling the weight of 100 alien eyes watching her every move. The massive space station hummed with activity as beings from across the galaxy worked together to coordinate the war effort. Tall crystal creatures that sparkled like living diamonds moved between shorter furry beings with 6 arms, while floating gas clouds communicated through color changes that painted the corridors in shifting rainbows. Lisa walked beside Dr. Alex Turner and Commander Ryan Clark as they followed their alien escort toward the meeting chamber. Alex carried a datapad filled with his research about the war, while Ryan kept his hand near his sidearm, even though they both knew human weapons would be useless against advanced alien technology. They were completely outmatched in every way. Except one, and Lisa hoped that would be enough. Admiral Morrison waited in a conference room that could have held a small city. The holographic displays showed star maps covered in red zones where battles raged across dozens of systems. Ships moved like tiny lights between the planets while damage reports scrolled past in languages Lisa could not read. The scale of the conflict was beyond anything humans had ever imagined, and she felt very small standing in the center of it all. The Admiral was a tall being with blue skin and silver eyes that seemed to look right through her. Other alien commanders filled the room, representing species that had been fighting this war since before humans had invented agriculture. They watched the human delegation with expressions that ranged from curious to amused to openly dismissive. Morrison spoke in perfect English through a translation device that made his voice sound mechanical and cold. He welcomed the humans to the station and explained the current military situation with the kind of patience reserved for small children. The Zephyrian Empire controlled 47 star systems, while the Federation held 31, with the remaining 12 systems serving as contested battlegrounds where neither side could gain control. Lisa listened politely as Morrison described the enemy forces and their capabilities, but she could see that he was testing her knowledge and expecting her to realize how hopeless the human position really was. When he finished his briefing, the room fell silent, and every alien eye focused on her, waiting to see how she would respond to the overwhelming evidence of human inadequacy. Alex stepped forward and activated his datapad, projecting images of past battles onto the room's displays. He had spent months studying the war, and his analysis showed patterns that surprised the alien commanders. Every Federation attack followed the same basic approach, with minor variations based on enemy positions and available resources. Every Zephyrian counterattack used similar strategies adapted for different circumstances. The Crystalline Council fought like master chess players who could see 50 moves ahead and plan for every possible response. Their battles were works of art, where every ship movement served a specific purpose and every weapon fired at precisely the right moment. They never made mistakes, and they never wasted resources on actions that did not advance their strategic goals. The Vorthan Collective operated like a single organism, where every part knew what every other part was doing at all times. Their coordination was perfect, and their adaptation was instantaneous. When Federation forces used a new tactic, the Vorthans would counter it within minutes and share that knowledge across their entire fleet. They learned from every encounter and became stronger with each battle. Alex explained that both sides had become trapped by their own perfection. The Crystalline Council was so logical that their actions had become predictable to anyone who understood their thinking patterns. The Vorthan Collective was so coordinated that they could not function when their communication was disrupted, or when they faced situations that did not fit their shared understanding. Ryan activated another display, showing human military history. From ancient battles fought with swords and shields, to modern conflicts involving advanced technology. Human warfare was chaotic and unpredictable, with strategies that often seemed to make no sense, until they succeeded against impossible odds. Humans had won battles by doing exactly what their enemies expected them not to do, and lost battles by following plans that should have guaranteed victory. The alien commanders looked confused as Ryan explained that human military doctrine was based on the principle that no plan survived contact with the enemy. Human soldiers were trained to think independently and adapt to changing situations without waiting for orders from their superiors. Human generals expected their carefully crafted strategies to fail and prepared multiple backup plans that could be implemented without central coordination. Morrison interrupted to point out that human unpredictability would be meaningless against enemies who could destroy human ships before they could get close enough to attack. Ryan smiled and agreed that humans could not win a direct confrontation with superior alien technology, but suggested that winning was not always about having the best weapons or the strongest shields. Alex presented, his final analysis showing how the war had become a stalemate because both sides were fighting according to rules that prevented either one from achieving total victory. The Crystalline Council would not risk their perfect formations on desperate attacks, and the Vorthan Collective would not split their forces in ways that might disrupt their coordination. Both sides had become so focused on not losing that they had forgotten how to win. Lisa finally spoke, and her words carried the confidence that had made Morrison respond to her original message. She told the assembled commanders that humans did not understand the advanced technology or sophisticated strategies that dominated galactic warfare, but they did understand that sometimes the most effective action was the one that made no logical sense. She proposed a simple test that would prove human effectiveness without risking major Federation resources. Give her 3 ships with mixed human and alien crews and let them attempt one mission against the Zephyrian forces. If the humans failed, they would return to Earth and never again interfere with galactic affairs. If they succeeded, Morrison would consider expanding human involvement in the war effort. The room erupted in discussions, conducted in dozens of languages, as alien commanders debated the wisdom of trusting primitive humans with advanced technology. Morrison raised his hand for silence and looked directly at Lisa with those silver eyes that seemed to see into her soul. After a long moment, he agreed to her proposal, and Lisa knew that the real test was just beginning. The stars burned with the fire of war across half the galaxy, and Admiral Jake Morrison stood at the window of Kepler station, watching another fleet of damaged ships return from battle. 300 years of fighting had turned space into a graveyard, where broken vessels drifted between the planets like metal ghosts. The war between the Galactic Federation and the Zephyrian Empire had consumed entire worlds, and Jake had seen too many good soldiers die in battles that changed nothing. The Crystalline Council controlled the Federation fleet with minds made of living silicon that could think faster than any computer. Their ships moved in perfect formations, and their weapons never missed their targets. Every battle plan was calculated to the smallest detail, and every strategy was designed for maximum efficiency. When they fought, they looked like dancing crystals of light cutting through space with deadly precision. On the other side, the Vorthan Collective shared one massive mind that connected every soldier and every ship in their empire. They moved together like a swarm of insects, and when one ship learned something, all the others knew it instantly. Their biomechanical fighters could change shape during battle and adapt to any weapon the Federation used against them. Fighting the Vorthans was like fighting a single creature with 10,000 bodies. Jake had commanded Federation forces for 20 years, and he knew the terrible truth that no one wanted to admit. Neither side could win this war because both sides had become too good at fighting each other. Every tactic had been tried, and every strategy had been tested in countless battles. The Crystalline Council would attack with mathematical perfection, and the Vorthans would respond with perfect coordination. Then the Vorthans would counterattack with adapted bioships, and the Council would respond with new energy weapons. The dance of death continued year after year, with neither side gaining any real advantage. The cost was staggering, and Jake saw it in the reports that crossed his desk every day, planets stripped of resources to build more ships, colonies evacuated, as battle lines shifted back and forth across star systems. Millions of beings from dozens of species had died, and still the war continued like a machine that no one knew how to stop. That morning, Jake received a transmission that made him laugh despite the grim situation. The message came from a small, blue planet in an outer spiral arm where a primitive species called humans had just discovered faster-than-light travel. Their ship was called the UES Horizon, and their captain was named Lisa Hayes. She was requesting permission to join the Federation fleet and help fight the Zephyrians. Jake studied the data about human technology and shook his head in amazement. These creatures still used chemical rockets for most of their space travel. Their weapons were crude metal projectiles and explosive devices. They had no energy shields, no plasma cannons, and no quantum computers. Their fastest ships barely qualified as interstellar vessels, and their most advanced artificial intelligence was less sophisticated than a Federation maintenance robot. What made the message even more amusing was the confidence in Captain Hayes' voice as she explained how humans could help end a war that had defeated the greatest military minds in the galaxy. She spoke about human determination and creative thinking as if these qualities could somehow overcome the massive technological gap between her species and the warring empires. Jake almost deleted the message, but something in the human captain's tone made him pause. There was no fear in her voice, even though she had to know that human ships would be destroyed in seconds if they entered a real battle. She spoke with the kind of certainty that came from either complete ignorance or complete confidence, and Jake had learned to respect confidence even when it seemed misplaced. The Federation was desperate enough to try anything, and Jake had seen too many conventional strategies fail to dismiss any possibility entirely. The war had reached a point where both sides were simply going through the motions of fighting without any real hope of victory. Maybe it was time to try something completely different, even if that something came from a species that still thought metal projectiles were effective weapons. Jake decided to respond to the human message and invite Captain Hayes to Kepler Station for a meeting. He told himself it was just curiosity, but deep down he wondered if these primitive creatures might see something that the advanced civilizations had missed. Sometimes the simplest minds could find solutions that escaped the most sophisticated thinkers, and perhaps the humans would offer a fresh perspective on an old problem. As he composed his reply, Jake looked out at the damaged ships in the station's docking bays and made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. He would give the humans a chance to prove that primitive determination could succeed where advanced technology had failed. After 3 centuries of stalemate, it was time to try the impossible and see what happened when the least advanced species in the galaxy took on the greatest military challenge in known history.